There is a word in Konkani, borrowed from Portuguese, worn smooth by 4 centuries of use, that captures something no other Indian language has quite managed to name. Susegad. It means quiet, contented, unhurried. It means lying in a hammock in the afternoon with no particular plans. It means a cold beer at a beach shack as the light goes gold over the Arabian Sea. It means that the meeting can wait, the problem can wait, the world can wait. Because right now there's a fish curry and rice and a gentle breeze, and that is enough. Goa is the only state in India with a word for this philosophy. And this is not an accident that the word is borrowed from the language of the people who colonized this land for 451 years. Susegad is what happens when the Portuguese temperament and the Konkani spirit meet the Arabian Sea and decide between them that there is simply no reason to rush. But Goa is not only sunsets and Susegad. It is the smallest state in India by area and one of the most layered by history. It was the jewel of the Portuguese Empire in Asia. It was the site of the Goan Inquisition, one of the most violent acts of religious persecution in Indian history. It was incorporated into India not when India became independent in 1947, but 14 years later in 1961 in a military operation that lasted 36 hours. And it has given India Lata Mangeshkar, which is enough reason by itself to spend half an hour here. Namaskar and welcome back to Around India in Half an Hour. I'm Ray and this is episode 6. We've been to Andhra Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Bihar and Chhattisgarh. Coast, mountains, river plains, the cradle of civilization and the forest heartland. Today, we come to the place everyone in India has an opinion about. Goa, India's smallest state by area. 3,702 square kilometers, smaller than some Indian districts. Population of barely 1.6 billion. And yet, no state in India generates more curiosity, more fantasy, more complicated feelings among Indians and the world's visitors than this little stretch of the western coast. People come here for the beaches. They stay, if they're paying attention, for something harder to name. Today, we try to name it. Goa sits on India's southwestern coast on the Konkan Strip. That narrow coastal plain wedged between the Western Ghats and the Arabian Sea. It's bounded by Maharashtra to the north, Karnataka to the east and south, and the sea to the west. Its coastline stretches for about 105 kilometers, relatively short but extraordinarily varied. The geography divides cleanly into 2 zones. The coastal zone, the strip of beaches, estuaries, tidal creeks, and coconut-lined shores that everyone pictures when they think of Goa. It's relatively flat, densely settled, and dominated by the rivers that flow west from the Ghats. The Mandovi, the Zuari, the Sal, the Chapora. These rivers create wide, calm estuaries that are the heart of Goan life. The fishing harbors, the ferry crossings, the evening promenades. The Mandovi, flowing through the state capital Panaji, is Goa's central artery. The interior zone, the hilly, forested region of the Western Ghats that rises behind the coastal strip, is an entirely different Goa. Here, the land climbs into the Sahyadri ranges, covered in dense tropical evergreen and moist deciduous forest, alive with wildlife. The Bhagwan Mahavir Sanctuary and Mollem National Park, together covering about 240 square kilometers, protect a landscape of extraordinary biodiversity, including the four-horned antelope, the Indian gaur, leopards, and a dazzling array of birds. The Dudhsagar Falls, sea of milk, plunge 310 meters down a sheer cliff face. In these forests, one of India's tallest and most dramatic waterfalls, most dramatically reached by a railway line that crosses directly in front of the cascade. Goa receives over 3,000 milliliters of rainfall during the monsoon, and those months, June through September, transform the state. The tourists thin out, the rivers swell, the hills go a green so intense it seems almost artificial. Beach shacks close, Goans reclaim their coast, and the interior forests burst into a lushness that the dry season visitor has no idea of. Monsoon Goa, often overlooked, is in many ways the most beautiful. The state is divided into two districts, North Goa and South Goa. North Goa contains the capital Panaji and the beaches that most visitors know, Kalangute, Baga, Anjuna, Vagator. South Goa is quieter, more traditional, with longer and less crowded beaches, Palolem, Agonda, Kolva, and the more architecturally significant villages and churches. Goa's borders with Maharashtra to the north and Karnataka to the east and south are more than administrative boundaries. They are cultural transition zones. The northern border with Maharashtra represents the southern edge of the Marathi cultural and linguistic world, and the Konkan coast's most northern stretch. The eastern and southern borders with Karnataka mark the transition between the Konkani-speaking coastal community and the Kannada-speaking Deccan interior. The most significant border in Goa's modern identity is not a land boundary at all. It is the sea boundary that kept this tiny territory in Portuguese hands while the rest of India became independent in 1947. And that made Goa the last colonial enclave on Indian soil until December 1961. Portugal considered Goa not a colony but an overseas province, Estado da India, the state of India, and refused all negotiations for its transfer. The sea kept it separate and the Portuguese warships kept it Portuguese until India finally decided that 14 years of waiting was enough. Goa's history begins, as all Indian histories do, in deep time. The Uskalimal rock engravings, petroglyphs, carved into the bed of the Kushavati River in South Goa are among the earliest evidence of human settlement in India, dated to the Upper Paleolithic or Mesolithic period. Goa was already a place of human story before history began being written. The early historical period brought the usual parade of South Indian powers. The Mauryan Empire reached here under Ashoka. The Bhojas and Chalukyas ruled it in the early medieval period. The Kadamba dynasty made it their capital from the 2nd century CE until the 14th century. The Kadambas were considered the first indigenous rulers to give Goa a distinctly local political identity. The Vijayanagara Empire controlled it and valued it enormously as the primary entry point for the Arabian horses its cavalry depended on. The Bahmani Sultanate and the Adil Shahi Sultanate of Bijapur controlled it through the late medieval period. And then, in 1510, the Portuguese arrived. Afonso de Albuquerque, the great Portuguese admiral and governor of Portuguese India, had identified Goa as the ideal base for Portugal's Asian empire. He attacked it in 1510. He was initially repelled by Yusuf Adil Shah and returned with reinforcements. And crucially, with the help of a local Hindu privateer named Timoji, who provided intelligence and troops, took the city decisively. Adil Shah died that same year. Within months, Portuguese Goa was firmly established. What Albuquerque built was not merely a trading post. He made Goa the capital of the entire Portuguese Eastern Empire, a hub from which Portugal controlled the spice trade from Hormuz to Macau. Old Goa, Velha Goa, was built into a grand city. Churches, convents, government places, a mint, hospitals. And at 16th century peak, it was so populous as Lisbon itself and was called the Rome of the East by visitors who marveled at its churches and civic grandeur. The Viceroy of Portuguese India ruled from here. All of Portugal's eastern territories, Mozambique, Macau, Timor, Malacca, answered ultimately to Goa. The Portuguese brought Christianity and they brought the Goan Inquisition. Established in 1560 under the influence of Francis Xavier and the Jesuit order, the Inquisition was a formal inquisition of religious persecution operating in Goa for over 250 years. Its mandate was the suppression of heresy, initially targeting Jewish converts suspected of secretly maintaining their faith, then expanding into Hindu converts, and eventually to almost anyone reported by neighbors or enemies. Practices targeted including maintaining Hindu customs, possessing Sanskrit texts, celebrating Hindu festivals, and retaining Hindu names. The methods included imprisonment, torture, and autodafé, public ceremonies of penance that sometimes ended in burning at that stake. The French philosopher Voltaire, hearing of the Inquisition's methods, described it with the disgust of enlightenment. The temples of Goa were systematically demolished. The deities were saved by priests who carried them into the interior, where they were re-established. Many of the most important Hindu temples in Goa today, including the Mangeshi temple, are located in the interior precisely because their deities were evacuated from the coastal zone during this period. The Inquisition was formally abolished in 1812, but the cultural and demographic transformation it had driven, a significant Catholic population in Goa, Portuguese names, Portuguese-influenced Konkani, was permanent. Saint Francis Xavier, the Jesuit missionary who arrived in Goa in 1542 and spent the following decade working across India, Malacca, and Japan, baptizing, preaching, and establishing Christian communities, died in 1552 on an island off the Chinese coast while attempting to enter China. His body was brought back to Goa and placed in the Basilica of Bom Jesus, where it remains to this day, encased in a jeweled silver casket. It is visited by hundreds of thousands of pilgrims and tourists annually. Xavier was canonized in 1622. His body, which was by accounts of witnesses showed no signs of decay when returned to Goa, is still periodically displayed to the public in a ceremony called the Exposition, held roughly every decade. The last full exposition was in 2024-25, drawing millions of visitors. The Portuguese Empire declined from the 17th century onward as Dutch, British, and French rivals eroded its trade monopolies. Goa itself shrank to a smaller territory. The old conquistas, as the surrounding region fell to the Marathas and later the British. But Portugal held its territory with extraordinary stubbornness. When India became independent in August 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru fully expected Portugal to negotiate Goa's transfer, as the other European powers had negotiated theirs. Portugal refused, absolutely, repeatedly, and with increasingly absurdity as the decades passed. Goan nationalists and freedom fighters inside the territory risked their lives for liberation. Tristão de Bragança Cunha, born in 1891, known as the father of Goan nationalism, was imprisoned by the Portuguese multiple times and spent 16 years in Portuguese jails for his activism. He died in 1958, 3 years before liberation came. On December 17, 1961, 14 years after independence, Nehru pushed beyond patience, authorized Operation Vijay. The liberation involved air, sea, and land strikes for over 36 hours, during which Goa was liberated from 450 years of Portuguese rule. Indian forces crossed the border from the north and east simultaneously. The war officially ended at 20:30 hours on 19 December 1961 as Governor General Manuel Antonio Vasallo de Silva signed the instrument of surrender, bringing 451 years of Portuguese rule in Goa to an end. There was some international criticism. The United States and Britain tabled a UN Security Council resolution condemning the action, which was vetoed by the Soviet Union. But the moral case was clear, and virtually the entire post-colonial world supported India. Goa was initially a union territory, administered from Delhi. It became a full state on May 30, 1987, a date celebrated as Goa Statehood Day. The question of what Goa's identity was: Indian, but not quite mainland Indian; Catholic, but not quite Western; Konkani, but with Portuguese in its vocabulary, was a live and genuine question in the years immediately after liberation. It has not been fully resolved, but it has been the making of Goa's extraordinary cultural character. Goa today has a population of approximately 1.6 million, India's smallest state by area, and its fourth smallest by population. The capital is Panaji, a small charming city at the mouth of the Mandovi, with tiled Portuguese-influenced houses in the old Fontanias, quarter, a cathedral, a riverside promenade, and a compact, livable quality that distinguishes it from every other Indian state capital. The largest city is Vasco da Gama, named directly after the Portuguese explorer who discovered the sea route to India, a port city and industrial center. Tourism is the economic backbone, generating roughly 16% of the state GDP and employing a significant portion of the workforce. Goa recorded 54.55 lakh tourist arrivals in the first half of 2025 alone. The state's per capita income is among the highest in India, more than 3 times the national average, a product of tourism combined with a relatively small population. The Konkani language is the official language and the mother tongue of about two-thirds of the residents, though Marathi, Hindi, English, and Portuguese all have living communities of speakers. Konkani, an Indo-Aryan language, is spoken in two broadly different registers: the Devanagari script Konkani of the Hindu community and the Roman script Konkani of the Catholic community, each carrying distinct vocabulary and flavor from centuries of different influences. The official language controversy over which script should hold official status has been one of the most persistent political debates in Goa's post-liberation history. The religious composition is roughly 66% Hindu and 25% Catholic Christian, a unique profile in India that gives Goa its distinctive capacity to celebrate Ganesh Chaturthi and Christmas with equal enthusiasm, to have a church and a temple in the same village square, and to produce a culture that is genuinely and irreducibly syncretic. Let's talk about the remarkable people from Goa. Lata Mangeshkar, born September 28, 1929 in Indore, to a family with roots in the Mangeshi village of Goa, after which she is named. She was the Nightingale of India. She sang over 30,000 songs across a career spanning 7 decades. In every major Indian language, her voice, clear, pure, capable of a sweetness that bordered on the supernatural, defined the sound of Hindi cinema from the late 1940s until the 1990s. She won the Bharat Ratna in 2001. When she died in February 2022, India observed a national day of mourning. It was the right call. Lata Mangeshkar was not merely a singer. She was a sound that an entire civilization grew up with, fell in love to, grieved to, celebrated to. Her family's origins in the Mangeshi tradition, her father, Pandit Dinanath Mangeshkar, was a classical singer and theatre performer from Goa, are the root of a musical inheritance that she transformed into something the world could hear. Kishori Amonkar, born 1931 in Mumbai to a family with Goan roots, student of the great Mogubai Kurdikar, who was herself a Goan. Kishori Amonkar was the greatest Hindustani classical vocalist of the Jaipur Atrauli Gharana of the late 20th century. Her rendition of ragas, particularly the night ragas like Yaman and Bhairavi, had a quality of absolute interiority, as if she were singing not to an audience, but to the raga itself. She won the Padma Bhushan and the Sangeet Natak Academy Award. She died in 2017. Music teachers still play her recordings to students as examples of what classical music can be. Charles Correa, born 1930 in Sikandrabad to a Goan Catholic family, he became India's most internationally celebrated architect, a figure whose buildings, ideas, and influence of the profession rival Le Corbusier's influence on Indian architecture, with the crucial difference that Correa's work grew from a deep engagement with the Indian climate, culture, and history, rather than imposing a European modernist template. His Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Museum in Ahmedabad, Jawahar Kala Kendra in Jaipur, the British Council building in Delhi, and his master plan for Navi Mumbai are touchstones of modern Indian architecture. His concept of the open to sky space, the courtyard, the veranda, the threshold between interior and exterior, was a direct response to Indian climate and a recovery of what he saw as a fundamentally Indian spatial idea. He received the Padma Shri, the Padma Vibhushan, and the Aga Khan Award for architecture, among many honors internationally. Leander Paes, born June 17, 1973, in Calcutta, to a Goan Catholic family. He is India's greatest tennis player and one of the finest doubles players in the history of the sport. He won 18 Grand Slam titles in doubles and mixed doubles combined, a number exceeded by only a tiny handful of players in the history of the game. He won a bronze medal at the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, India's first Olympic tennis medal since 1952. He played Davis Cup for India for over 25 years, an almost unimaginable span of national service. His father, Vijay Pace, was a bronze medalist at the 1972 Munich Olympics in field hockey. Leander's story is not just a story of a remarkable athlete. It is the story of a Goan family that has been part of Indian sporting excellence across two generations and two sports. Damodar Mauzo, born 1944 in Majorda, South Goa, a Konkani novelist, story writer and critic who won the Jnanpith Award, India's highest literary award, in 2022, the first Konkani writer to receive it. His fiction, written in Konkani in the Devanagari script, explores the lives of extraordinary Goans across the Catholic and Hindu communities, the complexities of Goan identity post-liberation, and the human cost of a social change. The Jnanpith Award for Konkani is significant beyond his individual achievement. It is a recognition that Konkani, a language with a complex and contested literary history, has a living tradition of world-class literature. Remo Fernandes, born 1953 in Xiaolin, North Goa, he is Goa's defining rock musician, a guitarist, singer and songwriter who blends Goan folk music, Portuguese fado, Indian classical music, reggae and rock into something entirely his own. His songs are in Konkani, English, Hindi and occasionally Portuguese, often simultaneously. He has proved that Goa's musical identity is not fusion as pastiche, but fusion as genuine cultural synthesis. The natural expression of a place where those traditions have coexisted for centuries. Goan cuisine is one of the great culinary traditions of India, and it is unlike anything else in the country. The result of 4.5 centuries of Portuguese influence meeting Konkani coastal cooking, producing a food culture that uses vinegar, wine and pork in ways found nowhere else in India. The foundation is simple: sheet kodi, rice with fish curry, that is the daily meal. The fish is fresh from the sea: pomfret, kingfish, mackerel, sardines, prawns. The Goan coast is extraordinarily generous. The curry is made with fresh coconut, Kashmiri chilies for color and mild heat, kokum or tamarind for sourness, and a tempering of mustard seeds, curry leaves, and garlic and coconut oil. It is a curry that is simultaneously simple and deeply complex. The coconut giving it richness, the kokum giving it brightness, the fish giving it the sea. Eaten on a banana leaf with the fingers, it is one of the most satisfying meals in Indian cooking. Vindaloo, the dish the world thinks it knows and mostly doesn't. The word comes from the Portuguese vinho e alhos, wine and garlic, a pork preparation the Portuguese brought from Lisbon. In Goa, it was transformed. The wine replaced by local palm vinegar, the garlic amplified, dried Kashmiri chilies added in quantity, the spicing deepened. The result is a pork dish of fierce, complex, vinegar-sharp heat that bears essentially no relationship to the mild, sauce-heavy dish that passes for vindaloo in most Indian restaurants worldwide. A proper Goan vindaloo, made with pork, cooked slowly until the meat falls apart in a sauce that is brick red, deeply flavored and powerfully acidic, is a revelation. Sorpotel, another pork preparation made from offal, liver, heart, kidney, and pork meat cooked with vinegar, dried red chilies, and spices into a dense, dark, sour, and spicy preparation. It is a dish that needs a day or two of resting before it reaches its best. Like Vindaloo, it improves with time. It is cooked for major Catholic celebrations, Christmas, Easter, weddings. It is deeply, specifically Goan Catholic. Shakuti, a complex curry of chicken or lamb made with a roasted spice paste of coconut, poppy seeds, coriander, cloves, cinnamon, and Kashmiri chilies. The roasting of the coconut gives it a dark, nutty depth. It is one of the most sophisticated spice preparations in Indian coastal cooking. Kafreyal, a green herb marinade of coriander, chili, ginger, garlic, and lime used for grilling chicken. The Portuguese brought it from their African colonies, Mozambique, and it became entirely Goan. The chicken is marinated for hours, then grilled or pan fried until charred at the edges and intensely fragrant. It is simple, direct, and magnificent. Bebinka, the great Goan dessert, a layered pudding made from coconut milk, egg yolks, sugar, and flour, baked layer by layer, each layer set before the next is poured, until it builds into a rich, dense, golden colored cake of seven or more layers. The patience required is considerable. The result is extraordinary. Not sweet in the obvious way, but deeply, subtly flavored, with the coconut and egg yolk and a hint of nutmeg, creating something completely its own. It is made for Christmas. It is the taste of Goan festivity. Feni, Goa's own spirit, with a GI tag and a fervent local following. Cashew feni is distilled from the fermented juice of the cashew apple, the fleshy fruit that grows above the cashew nut, producing a clear, pungent, fiercely aromatic liquor that takes some getting used to and then becomes completely compelling. Coconut feni is made from the sap of coconut palms, tapped and fermented. Both are local, both are distinctive, and both are entirely unlike anything else produced in India. Drinking feni in Goa, straight or mixed with a local lime soda, is one of the small, irreplaceable experiences of being there. Old Goa, the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the former capital of the Portuguese Eastern Empire, now a cluster of magnificent 16th and 17th century churches in a quiet landscape of trees and red laterite soil. The Basilica of Bom Jesus, housing the body of Saint Francis Xavier, is the centerpiece, a late Renaissance facade of basalt stone that has aged to a dark, dramatic grandeur. The Say Cathedral, the largest church in Asia when it was built in the 16th century, still one of the most impressive, stands nearby. Walking through Old Goa on a quiet morning with the smell of incense and the sound of bells is to feel 4.5 centuries simply collapse into the present. Panaji and the Fontanias. The state capital is small enough to walk and sufficiently beautiful to reward it. The Latin Quarter of Fontanias, a neighborhood of brightly painted Portuguese houses with tiled roofs and narrow streets, classified as a heritage zone, is one of the few places in India where you can walk through a genuinely intact European colonial streetscape that has been lived in continuously. Bakeries selling poi, the crusty Goan bread, and the smell of coffee and fish curry drifting from the windows. Dudhsagar Falls, in the interior of the state on the Karnataka border, accessible by jeep through the forest on a famous train route where the line crosses directly before the falls. The sight of 310 meters of white water crashing through dense green forest is one of the great natural spectacles of the Western Ghats. The beaches, the most famous in India, the most varied, and worth knowing beyond the names. Arambol in the far north is long, wild, and the gathering place for the kind of long-term traveler who is not in a hurry. Vagator has dramatic red cliffs dropping to the sea. Anjuna, the original hippie beach of the 1960s, where the first Western counterculture wave landed in India, still hosts the Wednesday Flea Market, one of the great outdoor markets in Asia. Palolem in South Goa is curved, calm, and perhaps the most classically beautiful beach in the state. Each beach has its own personality. The mistake is to go to only one. Tamdi Surla Temple in the forest interior of the Bhagwan Mahavir Sanctuary, a small 12th century Kadamba era temple built in black basalt, the only surviving complete temple of the Kadamba dynasty in Goa. All the others were demolished during the Portuguese period. It is a quiet, extraordinary building, compact, beautifully carved, surrounded by forest, with a stream nearby. Nothing prepares you for finding it. Goa Carnival, held in February or March, the 3 days before Lent. The Goa Carnival is the largest street festival in India and the most distinctly non-Indian one. King Momo, a symbolic figure of festivity, declares the start of the celebrations, and floats, bands, costume processions, and street dancing take over the main roads of Panaji, Margao, Vasco, and Mapusa. It is joyful, slightly chaotic, enormously fun, and entirely unlike anything else in Indian festival culture. Ganesh Chaturthi, celebrated by Goan Hindus with a devotion and elaborateness rivaling Maharashtra, including the immersion of large decorated Ganesh idols in the sea and rivers. In a state where Hindu and Catholic communities have coexisted for centuries, it is not unusual for Catholic Goans to participate in Chaturthi celebrations as neighbors, just as Hindu Goans may attend midnight mass at Christmas. Christmas, celebrated across Goa with a warmth and visibility unlike anywhere else in India. Churches at midnight, star-shaped paper lanterns illuminating every Catholic home. The smell of sorpotel and bebinka from every kitchen. Carol singers in the streets. It is the most Catholic Christmas in India, and it is extraordinary. Shigmo, the Goan Hindu spring festival equivalent to Holi, celebrated with folk dances, processions of floats, and community performances of traditional Goan dance forms, including Fugdi and Dhalo. The dances, performed in circles by women, are in call and response formations, are ancient and beautiful. Theater, Goa's own theatre form, performed entirely in Konkani, typically by Catholic Goan companies. It originated in the late 19th century, blending European theatrical forms with Konkani storytelling, music, and comedy. Theatres are structured around songs, kantarams, that carry the emotional weight of the performance, commenting on social issues, celebrating Goan identity, or simply being very funny. They are performed in village halls and community spaces across Goa, and they have a following so devoted that particular performers are celebrities within the Konkani Catholic world in a way that is entirely parallel to and disconnected from Bollywood. It is the theatre Goa made for itself. Goan classical music. The Mangeshi region of Goa has produced an astonishing number of Hindustani classical vocalists. Lata Mangeshkar, Asha Bhosle, Kishori Amonkar, Kesarbai Kerkar, Mogubai Kurdikar, Jitendra Abhisheki, all have roots in or direct connections to the Goan classical music tradition. The Mangeshi temple, one of Goa's largest and most beautiful Hindu temples, has historically been associated with music performance and patronage in ways that shaped a regional musical culture of quite disproportionate excellence. Konkani music blends Goan folk tradition with Portuguese influences to produce a popular music tradition that is entirely its own, warm, melodic, drawing on mando, a slow romantic song form developed in the 19th century by Goan Catholics, blending Indian and European harmonic traditions, and other specifically Goan forms. Chris Perry, the trumpeter and composer who brought jazz into Konkani music in the mid 20th century, is one of its defining figures. Goa has an outsized reputation in Indian football. Its league, the Goan Football Association, is historically one of the strongest in the country, and the state has produced a disproportionate share of India's best footballers. Brahmanand Shankhwalkar is a national legend. FC Goa, the Indian Super League franchise, has been one of the most successful and stylistically admired clubs in Indian football since its founding, playing an attacking, possession based game that reflects something about Goan culture's openness to technical influence. Leander Paes, already met in our Remarkable People section, remains the greatest individual sporting achievement this tiny state has produced. 18 Grand Slam titles from a population of 1.6 million. It may be the most impressive such ratio in Indian sporting history. Goa is the most visited state in India on a per capita basis and the most mythologized. The image, beaches, parties, hippies, cheap beer, sunsets, it's real but incomplete. It is the image of North Goa's beach belt, not of the interior villages where the Catholic families still speak a Konkani laced with Portuguese words, not of the Hindu temples rebuilt in the forests after the Inquisition, not of the Fontanias quarter with its ochre and green painted houses, not of the paddy fields of South Goa at harvest time. The Goan intellectual tradition, the debates about identity, language, and what liberation meant, is the most sophisticated in any small state in India. Goa was the last part of India to be liberated. It was also, in some senses, the part of India most thoroughly transformed by its colonial experience. The question of what Goa is, Indian, Portuguese, Konkani, all three, is not a settled one, and that unsettledness is part of what makes it extraordinary. What Goa wants most visitors to understand is that Susegad is not laziness. It is a philosophy born from 4.5 centuries of negotiating between the world that arrived and the world that was already here, and finding in that negotiation a way of being that the rest of India has been trying to learn ever since. Goa, the smallest state in India, the most photographed, the most fantasized about, and the one with the greatest gap between what visitors project onto it and what it actually is. A state that gave India Lata Mangeshkar, Charles Correa, and Leander Pace. A state that survived the Goan Inquisition and kept its temples alive by carrying the gods into the forest. A state that waited 14 years after Indian independence to be liberated and then celebrated by inventing its own word for contentment, Susegad. Next Tuesday, we travel to Gujarat, the birthplace of Mahatma Gandhi and the home of India's most vibrant business communities. An extraordinarily long coastline, the last Asiatic lions on earth, and a culinary tradition so distinctive it deserves its own hour. That's next Tuesday at 7 pm. Please subscribe or follow wherever you're listening and leave a rating if you can. I'm Ray. We've been to Goa. Let the waves dictate your rhythm and let Susegad be your mantra.